Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to talk about a most unusual book because it's so many things. Its title, A Stranger Like You. Its author, Elizabeth Brundage, and it's published by Viking. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim.
Yeah, this book is a number of different things, and all of them actually are put together in a very wonderful way. Let's start at the top. At one level, it's a tough look at the LA/Hollywood world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It really tries to look at the inner workings of the film industry from a very intimate place through the eyes of a female producer by the name of Hedda Chase.
And if there's any glamour here, you pass by it so rapidly that until you get over to some foreign country where they're shooting a film, we don't get any real sense of glamour. It's also a book about the difficulty of getting women portrayed realistically, honestly,
yes,
on the silver screen.
Absolutely. I'm glad
and you think
mentioned
that's
that.
Still a problem.
I do. I think as a culture we are so influenced by what we see visually, whether it's in the news, on television, on the computer, or in film. And women are still represented in a very particular way on the screen, I think. Maybe less so now, and some films are much more sensitive to it. But things like sexuality, the way sexuality is presented, for example, I think it has an effect on our culture, on our young people, and it works itself out in many ways.
One of the other things that you get into here is the effect of the Iraq War on a young Iraq veteran.
Yes,
and that's a very personal thing, and I think it's done. It's done very well, and I think it becomes a very important part of the story.
Absolutely. The character is Denny Rios. He's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. He's just come back from Iraq and is kind of trying to regroup, trying to get his life back on track, but really suffering with his memories of being in the war. And he becomes the hero of the book.
One of the other stories in the book is a story of a newcomer to the screenwriting business. He's actually an underwriter for Equitable Life Insurance, and he's fighting to get recognized. He's fighting to get accepted.
That's right.
In Hollywood, in the screen business. But at a deeper level, the book also becomes, I think it becomes about what you see as almost the universality of terrorism in our time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy that you mentioned that. I really wanted to look at, in a very fundamental way, this character's, first of all, his desensitized vision of the world, his willingness to do whatever it takes to get what he wants. He recognizes within himself a kind of new passion, which is this cause that he finds to not only get revenge for not getting what he wants, not getting his dream fulfilled, but also becoming almost addicted to the idea of fighting for something so passionately without worrying about any other aspect of life or the consequences, the effect he may have on anybody else.
If I recall correctly, there's a point in the book where he says, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to go into a terrorist kind of mode.
Yes.
That's all I can do at this point.
That's right. That's right. Towards the end of the novel, Hedda Chase has made this film, which we can talk about, which is about the stoning of an Iraqi woman. And this has been a chance for her to kind of redeem herself as a filmmaker, to reconnect with her early instinct, to make really important films that really shake people up, that have true meaning, instead of the kind of commercial, action-packed films that she's been making up until now. And so this film that she makes about this Iraqi woman getting stoned to death, it was an opportunity for her to have some sort of shift, philosophical shift in her life, in her work, And when the film comes out, it's very controversial. And so I wanted to sort of show how the events that happened to her, between her and Hugh Waters when he comes to get his revenge from her for dumping his project, I wanted to show how the events could easily be misinterpreted as some sort of terrorist event just because she made this film about Iraq. So looking at the parallels between those two things, those two occurrences, and tying it together to make a larger statement. Yeah,
precisely. The thriller aspect here begins with Hugh Waters arriving in Los Angeles to see why his screenplay called The Adjuster, which is kind of what he is, why it's been rejected. He gets to L.A., he gets in touch with Hedda, and his way of getting back at her is very, very strange.
It is very strange. It goes back to what we said earlier about being so desensitized.
Right. He puts her in the trunk of his car and leaves the car at the Lax
That's right.
parking lot. Elizabeth Brundage's portrayal of the film industry seems to me spot on. And when we return, we're going to find out why this is so.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Elizabeth Brundage is our guest today, and she's written a thriller novel, which is a hell of a lot more, called A Stranger Like You, published by Viking. Sheila Weller, New York Times bestselling author, says in part that Elizabeth Brundage is the real thing. Brundage imbues Hollywood with a mystical super reality and scrubs it of anything stock. That's the notion of, glamour that I was talking about in the first segment. I couldn't stop turning the pages of this action-packed, poetic, large-souled novel, and I closed it with a pounding heart, as did I. She's absolutely correct. All the other things that it gets into, and that's, really makes it a very large, as she says, big-souled novel, it's still, damn it, a thriller.
That's right.
And it grabs you and holds on. So it seems to me, though, that the Hollywood, the screenplay writing part of this is something you've had experience in?
Yes, actually, yes. I
must confess.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually...
You'll feel better.
I will. Actually, learning to write screenplays is incredibly useful for novelists. And I really learned I studied at the American Film Institute many years ago, and a lot of the memories of my experience then are really in this book. And I drew upon all of those experiences. I worked in the film industry. I worked within the system for about 5 or 6 years before turning to writing fiction for a variety of reasons. And I think it was very, very useful to study screenwriting, learning how to structure a story with a very concrete beginning, middle, and end, and also understanding this domino effect progression that moves the narrative forward. So very strategically. But without the wonderful thing about writing novels is that if you have an interest in language and characterization, you can really bring that into beautiful focus. So that's what I try to do, just really create rich characters while I have a passion for the language, and so putting them within this architecture of this fast-paced thriller.
I take it then that you've written some screenplays.
Yes, I have.
And when can I go see one?
I wish you could. That's the frustration that Hugh Waters feels, my character feels in this novel, is not something that was foreign to me. Truthfully, not that I would react the way he reacts, please. But it's a frustrating business.
You'd never leave a BMW with a wooden steering wheel in a parking lot.
Never.
No, that's a terrible thing to do. The question then, I guess, becomes, why are you now writing novels rather than still trying to do screenplays?
I think, I may write another screenplay. It's not something that I have decided not to do, but I've dedicated myself to being a novelist because, first of all, the writer of a novel has the ultimate control. You are in charge of creating this entire world without worrying about financing, budgets, actors. It's not a collaborative effort necessarily. You are on your own, and you are completely in control of this whole world that you're creating.
Sure.
So that's a wonderful thing for a writer.
You're like feeling like God, I know.
You know how it is.
Yeah,
you know how it is.
One of the aspects that you get into in this book about Hollywood and screenwriting and all that kind of stuff is where women sit, if you will, in the pantheon of that business. And there's one point in the book where you have Hedda sum it up rather well. Could you share that with us?
I would love to, and I just want to tell your listeners that this is in the second person, which is, if you remember from high school, you'll get it when I start reading. Okay. You are 40, which in Hollywood is not a good thing. Not that you are actually old, because of course you are not, but you have begun to feel slightly invisible at meetings with certain people, the younger directors, for example, most of them men, who grow impatient with your lengthy discussions of character and plot, your questions about context and rationale, and your desire to tell stories that resonate in the hearts and minds of the American public. Yes, it's true, your ambitions are lofty, and some of them actually rush you through lunch. In a town like this, where passive aggression is something of an art form, you have invented your own special version of subliminal espionage. In order to survive as a female, you are forced to behave like someone with a personality disorder, limiting your range of expression to a deadpan grimace. The smile, that old-fashioned symbol of genuine assurance, has become obsolete, replaced by its nasty cousin, the smirk, which, when coupled with the cruel but effective once-over, conveys to its recipient that he or she is a complete waste of time. The only time people sustain a genuine smile is when they are certain you are going to make them money. On your way up, you had acquired your own battle scars, and even now, even with all your success, you are besieged with doubt. You have not entirely outgrown the need for approval, the lavishing praise of an expert. Doubt is your compass. It prevents you from feeling happy, and your unhappiness is a strategic part of the mechanism that drives you, the feverish self-loathing that shoves you forward toward that shimmering light of your destiny.
That really says it, doesn't it?
I hope so. I hope so.
Really, really
Thank
good
you.
job. Is there any kind of similar situation because you're writing in a very male-dominated genre?
I think that it's difficult to entirely characterize what I'm trying to do in my fiction, so that by just calling it a thriller puts it into this genre category that is.
But really, this book is a hell of a lot more.
That I hope so.
And
I
this
tried.
book, A Stranger Like You, has many wonderful characters, including one named Foster. Of course, we're going to meet him when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
We are back. The book today is A Stranger Like You. It's a novel written by Elizabeth Brundage, published by Viking. And before we get to the most important character in the book, whose name happens to be Tom Foster, I want to ask you a question. I had the feeling that at a certain point, Denny Rios, the Iraqi war veteran, almost takes over the novel.
Yes.
Does that
think,
resonate with you and how you put it together?
Well, I think that's true because he's the guy who comes into the story towards the end of the book, the last quarter of the book, and he decides in his mind that he's going to take over the situation. He's going to make things right. And he really becomes the hero of this book. He's one of my favorite characters.
Good,
really.
good. What a great name. What a great name for a character. Really, really, really good. I mean, Tom Foster is a really, really great
yes.
name for a character. I'm not so sure about Danny Rios. Who knows? Well, let's talk about Tom Foster.
Tom Foster
and Hedda go back.
Yes.
Yes.
Tom Foster, he's like you, Jim, because you share the same name. He's a fiercely passionate man. He is the kind of guy, Hedda says that he's in his Sullivan's Travels phase, which means that he's determined to tell the truth about life the way he sees it. And he's just made a documentary called Transients Welcome about homeless people in Los Angeles. But he convinces Hedda, they were old lovers, not old lovers, but they were lovers once.
Yes, all right.
At the conservatory, which is based on the American Film Institute. And he convinces her to make this film about this Iraqi woman who was stoned to death. It's a very controversial film, and she agrees, not necessarily because of her own political convictions, but she's madly in love with him. And they go back in time. They go into this relationship together and rekindle their love affair and make this movie together.
And one of the things, it seems to me, she has to make this movie. I mean, given what we learned about what she thinks is missing,
yes,
and there are also other scenes about that, she absolutely has to make this movie, and no matter the consequences.
That's right. It becomes an opportunity for her to really change the way she's thought of in the industry, to really assert herself as somebody who's very, not only powerful, but who really has wonderful ideas that are very controversial and that she's willing to risk. She's willing to take a risk.
One of the things about Hedda, and she's a fascinating character because she spends so much of the novel in the trunk of a car.
That's right.
and yet she's major.
Yes.
There's another scene in the novel which I found very important and very searing in its impact. A screening is going on about a film that has what the guys would call a hot, powerful sex scene, which takes place in a public restroom.
That's right.
And
in Brazil.
I forgot it was in Brazil. And Hedda takes singular exception to this.
She does. She's every character in the novel sort of comes to a point where now something must change. They must change. And she's in the screening, and all of a sudden it occurs to her that every sex scene she's ever witnessed is from a male point of view. And here this woman is being, the woman character in the movie that they're watching is being kind of shoved against the wall and supposedly having, this incredible climax. But Hedda says she's going to have a headache. Her head is getting, hit against the wall. There's no way that she's going to be satisfied in this position. And the men in the room kind of snicker and make her feel bad for coming out with this information. And she leaves. She's somewhat diminished by the experience of the conversation and leaves. And that's right before she encounters Tom Foster.
And she's asked by the men in the room, show us or tell us how you would do this from I think they use the word feminist perspective.
That's right. And she's hard pressed to actually come up with it at the time. And that also is sort of a symptom for me for a lot of women who have miraculously climbed to positions of power, still have this sometimes, I don't want to say inability, but are intimidated by revealing their true feelings about very particular issues like this.
Well, one of the things that's wrong there, it seems to me at any rate, is that to ask her to rewrite the scene, so to speak, from a feminist perspective.
Right, first of all.
Is to ask a phony question.
That's right.
I mean, what she's trying to say to them, and I think she does quite well in part, is that if you want to do sex on the screen, let's be real about it.
That's right.
Let's be real about it.
That's right.
And don't create scenes that are unrealistic.
That's right. especially for kids who are watching, kids who are 17 and 18 who are just coming into their own sexuality. And so especially girls, are they going to see and boys too? It puts a certain kind of pressure on young people to have to behave or to think that behaving this way is going to achieve for them the most satisfaction. And so I think she does. She wants to present characters who are real with one another and sensitive and intimate and all of the things that we experience in our real lives, instead of taking this dramatic approach that is actually fairly unrealistic.
That's the important thing.
Yes.
It can be dramatic, it can be titillating, but it's so damn
That's right.
unrealistic.
Yes.
Well, there are thrillers and then there are thrillers. There are all kinds of thrillers, and there's A Stranger Like You, a great new novel by Elizabeth Brundage. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.